The first new petition is PE 1530 by Spencer Fildes on behalf of the Scottish Secular Society on guidance on how creationism is presented in schools. Members have a note by the clerk, the spice briefing, the petition and the submission. Can I welcome the petitioner? Thank you very much for coming along. And Professor Paul Braderman, who's the board member and scientific advisor for the Scottish Secular Society, to the meeting. If you could speak for around 5 minutes, I'll have some questions and then ask my colleagues to come along as well.
Good morning, and thank you for giving us an opportunity to come along and present our petition. This petition has attracted international attention because of the issues that are involved. Scotland's future depends on science, especially the life sciences, a topic which the convener himself has addressed here in the chamber. The signatories, and those who have written messages of support, including teachers, ministers of religion, and 3 Nobel Prize scientists. Evolution and the unity of life are central concepts to modern biology, just as the existence of atoms is central to the concept of modern chemistry. The alleged objections to a common ancestry, such as those put forward by the Centre for Intelligent Design, just as much as the objections to an old Earth put forward by so-called creationist scientists, lack all intellectual merit. If you disagree with what I just said, and you should dismiss our petition and give your reasons for doing so. But if in your assessment of the science you agree with us, with the overwhelming scientific evidence, a sample of which we have sent to the committee, with the science outlined in the Curriculum for Excellence, and with the massive stated consensus among the world's scientific communities, then the only remaining question for us to answer is how do we best protect our children from this campaign of disinformation? This is not about religion. This is about science. Despite some reports, the Scottish Secular Society is neutral on matters of faith. It has faith-diverse membership. As the SPICE briefing paper shows, we have no wish to restrict the discussion of any religious or philosophical viewpoint. There is indeed a strong tradition across the faith spectrum welcoming evolution as a manifestation of divine creativity. In view of what we've seen recently from the Challenger bus from People with a Mission Ministries, the plain declaration of intent by the Centre for Intelligent Design and other evidence that we can present, it is no longer credible to ignore the fact that there are organisations attempting, and with some success, to penetrate our schools in order to present creationism, young Earth doctrines, as a valid alternative to the established science. Why can we not, as the government suggests, simply just leave this to the good judgment of our teachers? Well, firstly, and let's hope not many, some teachers may well themselves be creationists. I personally have come across this through interactions with my child's nursery nurse. Second, there are places where even teachers, although may not be creationists, may experience pressure from that community to introduce creationism and, in fact, ignore the teaching of evolution. Third, teachers may feel unprepared to teach about evolution, especially if they expect a creationist challenge from the local chaplain. This will be especially true at the primary level with religious, moral and philosophical education, which is rarely itself taught by science graduates. Finally, and most importantly, it is rarely the teachers themselves that are actually the problem, but volunteer visitors and externally funded chaplains, whose offerings are often gratefully accepted by the schools who are currently coping with many other pressures. That is why we refer our petition and materials being presented rather than taught. And in the absence of the guidance we seek, any teacher who would want to object to any particular creation activities might well find themselves placed in an impossible position. You'll all be familiar, hopefully, with the scandal at Kirkton Home Primary School, and what was most alarming about that incident is that the chaplain responsible had been imposed and assisted by volunteers from his church for 8 years undetected. The material distributed there beggars belief. This is why we have prepared copies for the committee to peruse. Such material is typical of so-called creation science, a mid-20th century development, as my doctor colleague Braitman could possibly explain later on. The Perth-based Challenger bus pays a regular visit to many schools throughout Scotland. Visiting the bus is incorporated into the school day, where children are strongly urged to take part, and parents, where they are given permission, are not normally told that the bus itself is provided by People with a Mission Ministries, an organisation that features materials from Ken Ham's Answers in Genesis, a notorious US-based young earth creationist organisation which has actually attacked this petition twice now. Other creationist organisations also distribute materials or actually offer speakers to schools. Numerous schools are known to have creationist chaplains and creationist denominations, including US-inspired extreme creationist sects. They are often represented on school chaplaincy boards. We can supply details for the councils from some local authority committees and some examples around South Lanarkshire, Clackmannanshire and Falkirk. Members from these churches with extreme creationist young earth views could potentially make things difficult for teachers in their employ. The organisation Truth and Science, Young Earth Creationists, have sent copies to every school, copies of creationist pseudo-text misnamed Explore Evolution. This book is a production of the Seattle-based Discovery Institute, of which the Centre for Intelligent Design is closely associated. The Creation Research Institute, which promotes creation science, is amongst creationist groups offering speakers to schools also. One school and such in the Highlands has used the Genesis story being taught as literal truth, and has indeed designated one corner of the classroom in the past called the Creation Corner. At least 3 schools, to our knowledge, have hosted debates between creationists and defenders of mainstream science, although 2 such cases, the relevant councils later denied it in a Freedom of Information request, that such a thing had ever happened. In the words of one of the schools, last session our higher RMPMS class attended a Q&A with a creationist. This was then followed up with a similar event with an evolutionist as part of their course. But this was not part of their studies and this was part of the studies not advocating one particular set of beliefs. Now, this is absurd, having a Q&A session. It's almost like having a Q&A session from a flat earther and, for the sake of balance, having a discussion with a sphericalist. Creationist presentation, but the fact that this is even staged implies that there is an intellectual parity that just does not exist. Given these facts, it is no longer credible to deny that the existence of a problem, that this is a problem in need of official attention. The first step in solving any problem is to recognise that Scotland actually has one. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. A couple of questions I have on the other bits of evidence that we had to our committee. One argument was that what you're suggesting would in fact may well breach the European Convention of Human Rights, which is the rights for parents to have children educated in line with their religious and philosophical views. What's your response to that?
No, I don't think it does breach any right, because if that right was implemented as such as they view it, you would be teaching that the Earth is 6,000 to 10,000 years old to the majority of pupils, which would clearly contravene many areas of the curriculum for excellence. The
other criticism was that your petition didn't recognise the difference between creationism and intelligent design. How would you respond to that?
Let the Professor answer this question, if it's okay.
Yeah. I take it a whistle as that you don't agree with that, Professor.
Yeah. It is a magnificent sight to see the Director of the Centre for Intelligent Design asserting, turning purple in the face, that intelligent design and creationism have nothing to do with each other. And yet you will see, as I put in my response to his submission paragraph 1.7, it is of the essence of his case to cast doubt on the idea that natural processes, such as primarily evolution, could have given rise to the diversity of life by pretending that there is serious doubt about what he calls macroevolution, and which most of us would call evolution full stop, as part of the overall unity of life. In other words, while I'm sure he's sincere here, I believe he's a bit muddled. While he believes that intelligent design is not creationism, it incorporates as part of its rhetorical structure a questioning of what is, in our submission, and what I think you should also regard as the established science of common descent of living things. Creation, all advocates of intelligent design, nearly all advocates of intelligent design, deny what they call macroevolution. In this, they're going against the evidence. And indeed, one of the web organs for the intelligent design community is called uncommon descent, in order to emphasize the fact that common descent, which is what we claim to be part of the absolutely established science, common descent is, in their view, not established science. So by our definition, they are definitely creationist.
Thank you for that. As I'm sure you're aware, this is a very, very large area, and I suspect we could debate this all day. Unfortunately, we've got 20 minutes. I'm sure my colleagues will be focusing on the practicalities of education policy, because I think that's the crucial issue for us. Could I bring in Chick Brodie?
Yeah, just on that, good morning. Just on that, I mean, having heard your evidence, Mr. Fildis, regarding the role of teachers and the fact that you're not dissembling in terms of what they should or they shouldn't teach, why shouldn't, if they so choose, why shouldn't they be allowed to present intelligent design or creationism to pupils?
It's not a case of whether they should or shouldn't be allowed to. It's the context and how it's presented. For instance, my son was in the woods when he was asking the question about natural fauna, and the teacher was unable to give a scientific or biological response, so therefore immediately referred to God makes all things and we're all made from Adam and Eve. And my son came home asking me more questions about this. Now, I'm personally an atheist, so I wasn't happy about it. So I went back to the school to complete.
Forgive me, the petition says that you want to bar the presentation in Scottish publicly funded schools of separate creation and of young earth doctrines.
As valid
alternatives to science.
That's important. If you think they are valid alternatives to the established science, you should say so and you should throw us out.
But that validity surely is underpinned by the fact that the point you've made, that it should be down to teachers to determine the curriculum and how they present it.
Well, if it is down to teachers, in my own personal experience, then that has not been implemented fairly.
What evidence do you have of that?
Well, the evidence I have of that comes from many areas. I've just given you my own personal experience, so you've had it from the top.
But which wider experience?
Well,
because your frame of reference quite clearly is of a particular nature.
Yeah, well,
so what wider evidence do you have
well,
that's the case?
What we have through the Scottish Secular Society, we are basically a medium and we offer platforms where people from all walks of life and all faiths report into us and discuss with us in an open debate platform and also privately through email. Many of the concerns that are raised to us, unfortunately, come through as a private matter, and they always wish to remain confidential, but nevertheless make the complaint. And they don't want to be named. However, their statements, they are quite happy for us to refer them to the committee. And one such statement of evidence of creationism and the discussion of creationism taking place come through from one concerned Highland parent who wishes to remain anonymous. And if I can just read out one quick paragraph from her. A couple of years ago, I went to an open afternoon in the school's children's work on display. A banner in the corner of the classroom said Creation Corner. Intrigued, I went over to investigate and in my naivety thought it was going to be an art display. No, it was exactly what it said. A big handmade wall chart with flipping pages detailing how the world had been created in 7 days. In the beginning, there was light and dark. I was pretty horrified and seemed to remember asking one of the teachers where Evolution Corner was, only to be met by dirty looks from the teacher.
On the basis of the need for that debate, what debate have you had with the main bodies of the perpetrators of intelligent design and creationism? I mean, it seems to me that we're throwing bricks at each other without you, before even coming here.
Yeah, because
have we had that discussion?
Well, no, because we're not seeking compromise with them.
Oh, I see.
There can't be compromise in the science class with creationism.
No more questions.
Okay. Jackson Carlow.
Good morning.
Thank you.
I'm something of an atheist too, albeit an unconvinced and unhappy one, but nonetheless. You said that your petition had attracted international interest and support, although I notice it's got no signatories attached to it, which I'll just have to, maybe you can explain. I'm also struck by the fact that Charles Darwin might rather recognise your predicament, because, of course, at one point the role was completely reversed, and it was the science that was being challenged rather than the alternative. Now, I wasn't present at the creation of the planet.
Likewise.
I'm sceptical about most things, although I tend towards the evolutionary scientific theory that you yourself espouse. But I really would like to know what you think the worst is that can happen.
The worst is that can happen is there is a distortion of learning in the classroom. Now, Scotland at the moment is the life sciences and biomedical side of our industry is flourishing. We have some of the greatest stars coming through, some of the most creative minds. And from a young age, I would be horrified to think that there is any potential for those minds to be distorted in any way by suffering any form of cognitive dissonance when it comes to young earth doctrines, creationism, and what is actual science and what is real. Not a case of philosophising over science, but teaching the facts.
But do we not live in a slightly more real environment? I mean, my mother, for example, was told in her biology class, went to her biology, her mother told her that she was delivered by a stork. She obviously went to a biology class and heard that there was a more scientific way in which she was delivered. Went home and her mother told her that may be how they do things in Scotland, but it's certainly not how they do them in England.
Yeah.
The point I'm trying to make here is parents have a role in education. Young people are impressionable, but education is a much more rounded thing. And I just wonder, really, by, in a sense, seeking to drive what you and I might, I think, both regard as a ridiculous notion underground, it really doesn't serve any particular purpose. I'm not persuaded that any real harm is being done in all of this. And I think in the wider context of education, in the wider context of the parental involvement, in the wider context of the school, do you not think that the evolutionary model will prevail?
Yes, it will prevail in all matters, Jackson, and what you're kind of doing there is diluting the argument somewhat. As far as your mother being told about stocks, I think that's pretty much still the case in Scotland, so we have an issue there with sex education, I believe. But I'll refer this moment...
But my point is, people through a form of education come to understand that the truth is somewhat different,
well, why,
without it necessarily having been emphasised in the way that you might have wished.
Yeah, I'll pass this to Paul, but before I do that, well, why should we assert such untruths to our children in an educational establishment, particularly the science class? That isn't a whole world view.
Well, I mean, I've gone through life with children being taught about socialism, which is equally discredited, but it doesn't do really any great harm them being told what it's all about. So, I mean, I wonder just what you really think the physical damage to the intellect of a child in the round is going to be. And if you can point, or is it just a concern you have that this might lead to something more sinister? But can you point to anything at the moment that has actually been damaged in the kind of development of children into adults as a result of having been exposed to this theory in the midst of all the real science?
Yes, there have been cases reported in the press of, not in Scotland, I'm glad to say, of students actually walking out of lectures at university level because the lectures are based on evolution. There is concern in the scientific community about the effect of evolution rejection on subject choice at university level. My colleague Roger Downey, an emeritus professor now in the Department of Biology at Glasgow University, has carried out interesting research into the effects of creationist belief on subject choice among students. And I think that he is certainly one of the people, if I may presume to say so, that this committee should communicate with. I know that you are a strong believer in individual choice, individual freedom, individual making up of your mind, and I absolutely agree with you on all this. Nonetheless, if you tell children untruths at a stage when they are going to believe you, that is going to affect their outlook on life indefinitely, especially when you remember that most of them will not actually be studying science at university level.
One last, but we tell children that Santa Claus exists.
We tell children that Santa Claus exists, as it were, in inverted commas.
No.
We don't tell children that Santa Claus exists,
There were no
and
inverted
their
commas in my
eternal
household.
salvation depends on believing that Santa Claus exists.
Okay, fine.
Could just ask if witnesses and members could go through the chair, otherwise it becomes, that's what they call a rammy in Glasgow terms. Before I bring John Wilson in, just for the record, I understand that it's actually nearly 700 people have signed the petition. John Wilson.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning. You've mentioned, Mr. Feld, the issue about Clackmannanshire, Falkirk and South Lanarkshire and issues that have been identified there. Could you expand on what those issues are? Because I think this goes to the heart of your petition, and I would like you to expand on the reasons why you think it is necessary to bring this petition forward to this committee and to the Parliament at this time.
Yeah, I mean, we obviously have to present our evidence base here to demonstrate and illustrate that this is actually going on. I think that's a primary concern. So we've made freedom of information requests asking specific authorities if they have indeed invited anyone to talk on creationism or debate on creationism. And an example of how I can possibly say how some education authorities actually are unaware that this is taking place comes from East Renfrewshire. East Renfrewshire responded to our freedom of information request asking, within the last 3 years, have East Renfrewshire publicly funded schools addressed by speakers from Creation Ministries International or by any other speakers who claim macroevolution is speculative, or the evidence supporting separate creation over evolution, or a young earth over an ancient earth? And the answer was no. However, our friends in the Scottish Secular Society were made aware that this was not actually the case and reported this back to us. And I have a statement here that was forwarded to us through a conversation that took place through one of the reverends who had indeed been in a school, saying, I went to Wellingwood High School yesterday at the request of an RE teaching friend to discuss creation with his higher class. I had a great time. They were very nice and all left claiming to take the creationist position more seriously. The basic message was, I believe in the Bible, you believe the scientists' theories. Neither of us can prove our positions. But I am hopeful of the view that life in God will do right in the end, and the Saviour who will give me everlasting life. Like I say, I had a great time.
With that response, the issue that picked up in some of the evidence was concern that whether it's a pastor, preacher, minister, reverend, or whoever from a particular organisation, particularly the creationist intelligent design side of the argument, we're going into schools and presenting arguments in the schools out with the RE lessons, and we're actually bringing in volunteers to come and assist them in the schools. What evidence do you have of that? Because I think the issue is that while the guidance, current guidance at the present moment issued by the Scottish Government is that teachers are responsible for what is taught in the classroom, if, as you said in your earlier comments, if someone comes along and says to a teacher, I've got 3 people that are prepared to come in and work with your class on a particular issue, what's wrong with that?
There's absolutely nothing wrong with it, as long as they operate within the confines of the rules and within the curriculum for excellence. However, unfortunately, it is the case that some do come in with alternative agendas, as in the case of Kirkton Home Primary School last year. And, you know, we have one instance here, that's just one instance in East Renfrewshire that's gone unnoticed, but it went unnoticed in East Kilbride for 8 years. And, you know, there is no real mechanism in place or no reporting structure, audit trail, or I don't know, forgive me because I don't know how the school inspectors deal with this, but there isn't an actual reference point or guide, as we're seeking, that anyone can refer to record such matters or incidents. And that's what we're asking you to do.
Sorry, Convener, just to expand this slightly, because in the Scottish education system at the present moment, we have 3 types of education. We have the private sector, we have denominational education, and public schools, or in Scotland we talk about private education. And we have non-denominational schools. We know in terms of denominational schools what the religious affiliation is. In non-denominational schools, we have a number of teaching staff who have a particular faith belief. Is it wrong that those teachers impose that faith belief on non-denominational schools on the pupils that attend those schools?
Yes.
No further questions.
Anne McTaggart.
It's to ask, and good morning, panel.
Morning.
You've now mentioned, Mr. Fields, that it's
They pretended he's not there. Okay.
Mr. Fields. You've mentioned on several occasions now that it's went unnoticed in an area, I'm sure it was Hamilton, for 8 years. How do you think you could rectify that?
By this committee going back to the Education and Culture Committee and actually seeking evidence, asking for different groups to come in and ask for their references on this and their consideration and opinions on this as whether or not it's needed, because we believe it is needed. I mean, I can just show you one other thing that come through. This is a 6-day mural from a school in Kirkcaldy. Okay, and this is something that's been evident that this was placed on the school corridor for all of the school to see. Now, someone's commissioned this. Someone's asked for this to be produced. I referred this matter to, I sent an email to the authorities in Fife to ask about this. They referred it directly to the school. School phoned me, and the head denied that this was on the wall. But I have photographic evidence sent by an anonymous parent that it is actually indeed has been on the wall, but has since been taken down. So these kind of things go on. And as soon as they're challenged, they tend to contend that they don't go on. Now, we don't want that conflict. And this is what we're trying to avoid by asking for clear and explicit guidance.
Just for the record, if you're referring to an item that we haven't seen, could you leave it with the clerks?
I've got copies for you.
Could you leave it with the clerks so we could reference it for the official record?
I had actually put them in the inserts. Apologies for that.
Amit Taggart.
Thanks, Convener. So if this had... So if it was then recorded, would that satisfy you?
It's not a case, really, Anne, of satisfying us. It's satisfying teachers and parents. And they're the ones that are primarily at the root of this. It's to make sure that they have the knowledge that their children are going to go through primary and secondary school with their scientific knowledge and their exposure to science unhindered. That's all it is. We're not asking for a massive change in legislation. We're not asking for much here. We're just asking for some guidance to be issued to rid any ambiguity around this.
Also, you had mentioned earlier, Mr. Fildes, that you hadn't been in contact with any other agency with regards to this petition. Could I ask you to explain a wee bit more as to why?
Yeah. First and foremost, we're a secular society. So, like I say, we're of many faiths and none. So we have this discussion with members within the secular society on our Facebook's open group, which is one of the most hotly debated areas, I think, on Facebook sometimes. And we consult with our administration board. We hold monthly meetings, administrative meetings, and on our board we have pagans, we have Muslims, we have Christians, ex-Muslims, etc. But the most important people that we speak with are the parents who directly contact us regarding this matter. And it's through their consultation and it's through their complaint that we're here today. Because they're the ones that are writing to us with the complaint, with the distressed emails, telling us that they want something done. But the problem with the system is they want to remain anonymous because they don't want their names put out in the open for fear of reprisals from the school. So we have a system that says, well, you can't do that because this piece of guidance says you can't. That makes it so much easier for all bodies.
Sorry, but we're very, very short of time. I've got time for a very quick final question from Chick Brodie, and then we'll go to summation.
Leaving this subject aside, if we may, for a minute, have you any idea where we should bar Scottish publicly funded schools talking about alternatives?
Yes.
What you just have you any idea whether it's in other areas of science or in English or what have you?
Well, when you're in art, you don't teach maths, and when you're in biology, you don't teach chemistry. I think it's fairly self-explanatory.
Well,
I don't think we should bar anything else. I think we should just make a clear distinction that creationism is incompatible with science. That's merely it.
If there were people who wanted to go into the schools to deny the reality of atoms, we would be here talking about that as well. But it's not the case regarding atoms, but it is regarding the fact of evolution.
Okay. Which is healthy if there's a compromise and ongoing discussion, is it not?
Well, the compromise is that parents and children and people of faith have their church, they have their home, they have religious and moral education and philosophy. They have many avenues in which they can discuss this. It just shouldn't be discussed in the science class. That's all.
If you're talking about compromise, I think you were within the biological community. Of course, there's ongoing discussion about the mechanics of evolution, just as there's ongoing discussion about the ultimate causes of gravity. But there is no dispute that if you drop something, it falls, and there is no dispute within the scientific community. As apart from synthesized disputes, there's no real dispute as to the fact that you and a monkey are second cousins, you and a monkey are fourth cousins, you and a mushroom are fourth cousins. That is how it is, and the record shows it. And to deny that,
I'm not sure if that's unparliamentary language, but I quickly move on. Thank you very much for the debate. As I said at the start, I suspect we could debate this for several hours. However, the committee is now moving to summation, so there's no further questions from the witnesses or from the committee members. Obviously, we need to look at the next steps. Committee members were aware that we could obviously write to the Scottish Government, who are obviously in charge of education policy, or a variety of other groups. The other option is that we could obviously refer this to the Education Committee, which has obviously the raison d'etre of this particular issue, or a variety of other options that members may well come up with. Could you get a steer?
Comment, there is no such thing as doing nothing at this stage, because to do nothing is to send a signal that you're happy with how things are. Among people you should write to, I respectfully suggest the Association for Science Education, which is the largest...
Sorry, I should have said at the start that we've stopped contributions from witnesses now. Yeah, we're at the summation section.
Sorry,
yeah, just to summarise, what we're looking at then is we could write to the Scottish Government, which are obviously in charge of education policy. We could refer this to the Education Committee, or a variety of other options that I'm sure members may well come up with. Or, of course, we could close the petition, which is always an option at any occasion we have a petition. Chip Brodie?
Yeah, I subscribe to the last view. We've already had, as recently as August, a statement from the government in terms of leaving the tradition that we should not determine the curriculum, and that it's a matter for the educationalists. And I don't know, to write to them and then get back the same answer doesn't seem to me particularly constructive.
John Wilson?
My view is that I think we should write to the Scottish Government to seek clarification on the situation, particularly in light of the examples that have been given by the petitioners today, because I think there is an issue that we need to get clear from the Scottish Government, because clearly we are not in a situation where we read the headlines in Birmingham where there was allegations made against a particular religious grouping who were trying to influence teaching within the school curriculum in Birmingham. And I think it would be useful to get an up-to-date view from the Scottish Government in light of that. But, Convener, I would also suggest the committee write to the Educational Institute for Scotland, because the petitioners have made reference to the Educational Institute for Scotland in terms of their views. Also, the Secondary School Teachers Association in Scotland, as well as the Head Teachers Association of Scotland. Because I think there needs to be, in my view, a clear steer given to teaching staff about what is permissible to be taught within the lessons. And I know my colleagues not too particularly happy with that, but I think there needs to be a steer that we do not find ourselves in a situation where, because an individual, a group or individuals have resources to go into an educational facility and teach something that may conflict with the current views and current science, that we need to be very careful how that is taught in the classroom. And I do, like one of the witnesses today, I do have experience where my daughter's primary school, where we had a head teacher who came from a particular faith background, who was imposing that faith background, particularly on religious education classes, and was not widening out the curriculum to actually bring in other faiths or other beliefs in the teaching in those classrooms. So we need to get a clear steer from the Scottish Government about how this is done. But the other organisations, I think, are important to contact, because they need guidance as well, Convener.
Thank you for that. David Torrance, what's your views?
Convener, I'm happy to go along with John Wilson's recommendations.
Taggart?
Thanks, Convener. I'm not happy to go along with John Wilson's suggestion. The Scottish Government spokesman just the 31st of August clearly stated that teachers, head teachers and professional educationalists decide what is taught in Scotland's schools. Like what Chick Brodie had said, it's not for politicians to determine the curriculum. It's highly valued and remains a cornerstone of the Scottish education.
That's effectively going for closure then, just to check for the record. I'm Taggart. Right, thank you. Angus MacDonald?
Yes, thanks, Convener. I think there is an argument actually to refer to the Education Committee. However, at this early stage, I feel it's only fair that we should get an up-to-date response from the Scottish Government, despite the fact that they have given a statement to the Sunday Herald as recently as the 31st of August, in which they say this long-standing tradition that politicians should not determine the curriculum is highly valued and remains a cornerstone of Scottish education. But I think it would be unfair to close the petition at this stage. We should give them the benefit of the doubt and get an up-to-date response from the government.
Right, thank you. That's 3. Jackson Carlo?
It's to that statement that Angus MacDonald has referred, that slightly terrified by John Wilson's suggestion that we become very prescriptive about what is taught in schools. I'm not myself in favour of closing the petition at this stage, but in light of what the government has already said, I would be in favour of writing to them to ask them to confirm their view that they believe that the systems and the discretion which exists just now is robust enough to ensure that in the round children come out with the broadest possible education based on rational common sense without there being a need to interfere in the content of that. I did hear from the witnesses, when I asked what actual harm had been done, some anecdotal examples of things that might have occurred at international universities, which I thought really seemed very distant and far removed from the experience of primary schools in Scotland today. So it would be more that the government was committed to the view that the robust enough systems existed for them to cope with any curious views that might emerge, and perhaps for them to say that at some stage in the future, if they ever felt that was under threat, they would review this particular issue in the light of those changed circumstances.
Thank you. All members have now spoken, and clearly there's a majority that we write to the Scottish Government. Could I just confirm that members are also happy we write to the various educational institutions that John Wilson referred to? Is that agreeable? Thank you. Okay, so as a majority to write to the Scottish Government, could I then confirm the other points that John Wilson made was EIS and the Scottish Secondary Teachers Association, the Head Teacher Association, can ask then to show those who are in favour of writing to these organisations as well? That's the majority. Do members have any other issues they want to raise before we move on? Right. Well, thank you. As you've heard, we've we'll now take action to write to all these organisations. We'll obviously have this on a future agenda. We'll discuss your petition again. And obviously the clerks will keep you up to date. You're obviously welcome to be in the gallery that day if you just check with the clerks when it's coming up. And so thank you both for coming along and giving evidence to us. And I'll suspend for 2 minutes to allow our witnesses to swap round. Thank you all.